Everyone, I want to introduce you to the wonderful Dr. Jeanne Tighe, who is going to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her amazing new paper. I'll let you introduce yourself and tell us all about it.
All right, thank you. So I am Jeanne Tighe, as you said. I am a speech and language pathologist. I work in private practice in the Northeastern United States. And I also, I'm a board certified specialist in child language. So my clinical work focuses entirely on school-age children with DLD and other language-based learning differences. In addition to my clinical practice, I also teach courses in language development and disorders at Kean University in New Jersey in their undergraduate and master's programs.
Awesome. And you've recently published this new paper. I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about, I guess, what led you to writing your new paper.
Sure. So my paper, it's called SPICES, Disclosure Practices to Help Caregivers Digest a Diagnosis of DLD. So the idea for this paper came from a combination of my own clinical work. I have been working for years with children with DLD and their families. And even before we were really using DLD, especially in the United States, way before Catalyse, and over the years, I saw so often families over and over again would come to my practice and feel so confused about their child's language difficulties. They, over and over again, I heard, I don't understand. No one's ever explained this to me. I need to understand this. And then after Catalyse really helped us all start to get our hands around how to talk about DLD, and there were a few papers that came out in around 2020 that looked at some qualitative studies of parent and caregiver experiences in what do they know and how are they learning about their child's language disorder. And I started reading these papers that showed what I was seeing, which was they're struggling, that families are struggling to understand their child's language disorder. And that inspired me to get out there and do some more delving into this topic. So I set out to write a paper to review the research, to write a review. I set out to write a review on the research about how professionals disclose different forms of developmental disorders in children to their parents and caregivers. And of course, I was most interested in DLD, but there's not much literature on how that happens because we haven't been doing it well or very long. So it's, it's kind of a new thing that we're here in this space as speech and language pathologists, really getting into diagnosis of language disorder. So I turned to the literature on disclosure of other neurodevelopmental disorders or communication disorders in children to their parents. And so I found studies of parent experiences with learning and autism diagnosis, for example, or parent experiences learning that their child's deaf. Studies of families with other stories that were kind of related, and I found some themes. So I found that, first of all, parents and caregivers want to know a diagnostic term for their child's difficulties. Terms have power. Once a caregiver has a clear term for their child's profile, that term can connect them with a world of information about it. It can connect them to other people who are having shared experiences. And so the families were looking for these terms, these diagnoses. So that was finding one, was they were saying, we want this from our professionals. Another theme was caregivers and parents in these studies of other diagnostic experiences said, I need to be able to explain my child's challenges to others in our lives. So, we give families a lot of support in school, but DLD affects children all day, right? So a parent or a caregiver needs to be able to explain the communication challenge to a coach, maybe, or a clergy person who works with their child, or other grandparents and aunts and uncles. And this was another theme of, we need the language as families. We need the language and the information to be able to explain this to others in our lives. And of course, one of the biggest things that parents and caregivers talked about in studies of similar experiences was the sense that my child needs to understand their disability, and I have to talk to them about it. So again, I need the language to help my child have a term, have an understanding, to be able to be empowered to live with this disability that will stay with them. So my research and my review really illuminated across comparable or somewhat related experiences these benefits to a diagnosis shared clearly with families. And then ultimately I got to some ideas about how we can do that, to set up a framework, and a framework we can use to have those conversations in a kind of sensitive and productive way.
I'm curious then, from what you've said, and I apologize, Jeanne, this isn't one of my questions I was originally going to ask, but how has that changed your practice? Because you're a clinician working with these families, you've gone through this review, I guess. How has it changed the way in which you work with people?
Yeah, it has made me really thoughtful about what I'm sharing in that first conversation or first two conversations. I've always seen a need in my own clinical practice, even before this article. I've seen a need that the families have to, like, okay, tell me more. How do I learn more about this? Where do I go next? And that was such a strong theme in the research that I reviewed and in the model that I found. So it's really made me be much more concrete and organized in how I lay the path of next steps for helping families access that. And fortunately, it's a good time because, like the DLD project and some other work that's being done, internationally with getting information out there that's family friendly about DLD. Fortunately, that's gotten easier along the way, but I'm being much more intentional about really handing over and linking and following up on what they're learning about DLD after our diagnostic conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. So you've touched on some of your findings already, but maybe you'd be happy to talk us through some of your key findings or your key learnings that have impacted on your practice.
Sure. Well, maybe it'll make sense to talk through the model a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I mentioned that I found a model that's used in medical practice. Physicians are trained to have conversations with their patients when there's not so good news to share. And while certainly DLD is no life-threatening kind of diagnosis, it's difficult news for a family to hear. So there's similarities in that kind of conversation. So I adapted the SPICES model, which is used in medical practice for diagnostic disclosure, I adapted it by pulling in information from that literature review that I described. And also thinking about kind of just the circumstances of speech language pathology and our families and our topics. And so I turned it into a model called SPICES, which is an acronym. So the first S in SPICES stands for set up the conversation. We need some time. This is not quick. And that's a simple thing, but there's often not a ton of time in practice, especially if you're school-based and you're in a meeting with lots of other professionals and everybody has things to say. Sometimes just carving the time to really attend to this issue is the first most important thing we can do. The P in SPICES stands for address the caregiver's perceptions. So P for perceptions. Our parents and caregivers are coming to these conversations with their own thoughts about what's going on. So kind of starting by meeting them where they are in their thoughts and observations of their child's communication can help get to the next step. So we don't just get in and deliver news, like let's talk about what they're seeing, feeling, and thinking first. So after that perception, gather their perception, then we can inform. So I stands for inform. Then it's time to share this term. And not just, we don't just want to dump this as a diagnosis, but really your child has a set of traits and it matches this profile them, here's what it means. And so really breaking down the term and what DLD is all about. And then that leads us to C, which is connect the caregivers with other sources of information, other families, a next step, connect them with a next step. We don't want them to walk out of here going, oh my gosh, this is a thing. I don't know anything about this thing, and not knowing what they could possibly do next. So as I mentioned, that's a big piece that I've really tried to expand in my own practice. How do I connect them with more information and others? It's certainly important. E is empathize. We have to understand, like, it's not easy as a parent to think about, this is something that's real. It's not going to go away. It's a disorder. That word's a little scary, so it's connecting with the parents. They're going to have some emotional reaction to what they're hearing, and that's valid and fair. And, we need to kind of be there with them in that space a little bit. And then finally, the last S in SPICES is kind of a closing to this conversation. After you've gone through the other steps and you want to, at some point, we need to wrap up that conversation, that day, that time. You want to end with summary and strategy, strategize and summarize. So you want to kind of wrap up the key points for the family. They often need to hear things more than once. We all do. Like we all, we need to hear things more than one time. We also have to be mindful that many DLD runs in families, right? So we may be talking with parents and caregivers who also have some difficulty with language. So we want to summarize effectively and leave with action items. We're going to strategize. These are things we can manage. We're here to help. There are things we're going to do. So we want to have some plans. Now, that may all not be doable in one conversation. That's going to, often take more than one talk. And that's part of the model as well. The part of the setup too is you may need to set up, we're going to revisit this again. We're going to talk about this other times. And that takes some of the pressure off of everybody, that we don't need to accomplish everything all in one talk. But if we kind of run through those steps, we'll have gotten a lot accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that model for me is quite systematic and clear, but also I think adds to some of our existing practices as speech pathologists, because we do some of those things, but whether we consider all of them at that time, really important consideration. I also think important for the families. I love particularly that connect, giving them that more information. Because otherwise what happens, people go off and Google things, and, we're in a good position nowadays when we Google things, most things come up on DLD are pretty good, but, who knows what the future will hold as more people use the term and develop more resources and things like that. There'll be a plethora of information out there. And I think one thing that's nice is if families can be left with something that's positive as well. Often when you start Googling things, it's all the negative. So, thinking of something positive is tricky at the time, but often beneficial and maybe even a bit hopeful or aspirational.
For sure. I think it's a great thing that DLD Project and others are doing now is gathering the voices of older children and teens and adults with DLD to say, hey, look, there's a future here, so that that positive, hopefully some of the connections we can make are to examples of people who are living happily, productively with DLD.
Yeah, often the first question is, well, what does the future hold? Or, what does this mean? And sometimes it's hard to crystal ball gaze, but at least if we can direct them to other people with those experiences, they can see that, not only can you survive, but thrive. So.
Yeah, I think we certainly can't tell somebody's future, but it's nice to share that there are lots of futures that are good ones.
Yeah, 100%. So Jeanne, do you have any key messages for clinicians or maybe even families who are listening today?
Yeah, so I'd love to leave clinicians with the takeaway, again, that sharing a clear diagnosis with a family, it is a gift. It is a tool, and it's an important part of our practice as speech language pathologists and therapists to educate our clients and their families. It's, you know, one of the pillars of our profession. And so, you know, it may feel a little intimidating when you have to plan that conversation to, ooh, maybe this is going to be hard news to share, but hopefully the model gives some help. I think it, you know, as you were saying, it validates a lot of things we already maybe were doing, or that our intuition tells us are good ideas, but also builds out a solid plan for, I can present this topic in a way that's going to be digestible to them. It's going to be productive, and it will, if I have this conversation with this family and deliver this information clearly and thoughtfully, that's going to benefit those parents or caregivers and that child ultimately, and actually ourselves as the SLPs, because that sets up such a productive relationship with that family and that client and that child going forward when we're all on the same page. We can be a little selfish. It serves us too as the professionals to do this well. You know, so I just really want to send the message, like, this is to everybody's benefit to have these diagnostic disclosure conversations about DLD. And then for families listening, I would share that, you know, again, one of the most important things we can do as professionals to serve you as families and your children is to help you understand and to help lay the groundwork for living well with this lifelong challenge. There's good information. There's great information out there now, so much more than even 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago. We're making such strides. So ask your professionals for help to find the good information, spend time with that information, connect with others. Talking with others who are having that same experience, I think, is it's one of the best things as a parent that you can do, and for your child to learn there are others who are having the same experience. It's such a healthy way to process everything that they're going to experience as a person with DLD. So we're here to help you follow that thread, and that finding that information, connecting with it and with others, it's going to smooth the path, and that's what we're here to help you do.
Amazing. I love that. Is there anything else, Jeanne, that you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
Yes. So one last thing I'm happy to share. I've written an ebook for families of children with DLD. It's kind of just an overview of what is DLD, what's going on at school, how you can support your child at home and the community. And it has a chapter on growing up into adulthood with DLD. I would be happy to share it with anybody who's interested. The ebook is going to be housed on the Rattled Raising Awareness of Developmental Language Disorder, RADLD website for the United States. So that's radld.org/US. It's coming soon. It'll be there shortly. So check back, and that'll be a free resource to share for anybody who would benefit.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for A, writing your paper, B, writing that amazing book, and C, for joining us today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Sean.